I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you have this magical microscope.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Right. So you take a physical object,
Right.
let's say the exact device you're listening to this deep dive on right now, and you just start zooming in.
Zooming way in.
Yeah, way in. You zoom past the outer casing, past the glass, the polymers. You keep going until you hit the molecular level.
Which is already pretty wild to think about.
Right. But you don't stop there. You zoom past the atomic structures, past the dense nucleus, past that whole swirling cloud of electrons.
Oh, wow. So we are going deep.
Exactly. You keep zooming until every single piece of recognizable, measurable physical matter completely disappears. And the question I have for you is, what exactly is left behind in that blank space?
I mean, that's the ultimate question, isn't it? Our brains are just, they're incredibly wired to understand reality through touch and sight and solid geometry. So the moment you strip all of that physical architecture away, you enter the space that just defies our basic biological understanding of what real actually means.
Yeah.
It forces a complete reevaluation of, well, existence.
And that is exactly where we are going today. Welcome to the Deep Dive. We are exploring a truly fascinating piece of correspondence from 2012.
Yeah, this one is a really unique source.
It really is. It's a text written by an author named Shui Feng, and it's a response to a reader named Lan Yan. This whole exchange happened at a place called the Life Zen Academy.
Right, and Lan Yan wrote in with just this massive, profound question.
Huge question. They had read a passage claiming that life itself is a, quote, spiritual antimatter structure, and that when particles become infinitely small, they turn into strings and superstrings.
So Lan Yan is basically asking, can you explain what these strings actually are, and are they the antimatter structure itself?
Exactly. Now, to set some ground rules for today, our mission here isn't to validate or debunk the scientific accuracy of this text. We're looking at this totally impartially.
Right, we're not here to play peer reviewers today.
No, not at all. We just want to explore this fascinating way the author uses complex physics as a metaphor to explain reality, consciousness, and basically the entire universe.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Because Lan Yan's question fundamentally challenges how we view our environment. It's like looking at a digital photograph.
Okay, yeah.
We know the image is made of pixels.
Right.
But Lan Yan is essentially asking Shui Feng, what happens when we zoom in past the pixels? What is the blank screen actually made of?
And to understand what that blank screen is made of, we first really have to look at how Shui Feng positions himself before he even attempts to answer.
Right, he sets up a pretty big caveat.
He does. He makes this crucial admission right at the start. He offers a very clear disclaimer, basically saying, I am not a scientist.
Which is honestly pretty refreshing.
Yeah, it is. He tells his reader that he can't answer using strict professional terminology or, academic rigor. Instead, he intends to use his own understanding and his own unique vocabulary to explain these really monumental concepts.
It's a brilliant rhetorical maneuver, honestly.
Right.
By stripping away that expectation of academic physics, he just frees himself from the constraints of the laboratory.
Exactly. He gives himself permission to use scientific concepts as, philosophical stepping stones.
Yeah. And we see this almost immediately when he tackles the concept of wave-particle duality.
Oh, yeah, this is a great example.
So as we know, wave-particle duality is that mind-bending principle that a substance can possess both wave and particle characteristics at the exact same time.
Right, which is historically a huge contradiction in physics.
Exactly. But Shui Feng doesn't use the standard double-slit experiment to explain this. He completely abandons the physics lab. He compares wave-particle duality to a single life form possessing both female and male biological characteristics simultaneously.
Yeah, which is, in classical physics, a wave is continuous, right? It spreads out, much like a ripple moving across a pond.
Right.
And a particle is discrete. It's localized, like a pebble dropped into that pond. Historically, they were thought to be mutually exclusive states.
You're either a ripple or a pebble.
Exactly. Yet at the quantum level, light and matter behave as both. By comparing this seemingly impossible physical contradiction to a single life form holding dual biological traits, he just completely reframes the conversation.
Wait, I'm trying to see the connective tissue in that metaphor because comparing quantum mechanics to biological gender traits is a massive leap.
It is a huge leap.
Is he saying that, just as a life form can hold dormant traits until they are biologically expressed, a subatomic particle holds both wave and matter potentials until we actually interact with it?
What's fascinating here is that that is precisely the mechanism he is trying to illustrate.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's actively humanizing the quantum world. He doesn't want the reader thinking about cold mathematical equations or abstract photon measurements.
Yeah. He wants them thinking about life.
Right. Life, duality, the human experience. He is laying the foundation for his ultimate argument, which is that the physical laws governing the universe and the internal experience of human consciousness are inextricably bound together.
Okay, so if matter holds this duality, if it exists as this dormant potential that can manifest as either a wave or a particle, the immediate question is, how does it choose its state?
And according to quantum mechanics, the state is determined by observation.
Right, the observer effect. And the source text takes this scientific concept and pushes it straight into profound spiritual territory. Schwefeng explicitly equates the observer's position to human consciousness.
Yes. And to ground this really abstract idea, the text references a very specific, highly controversial experiment.
Oh, the water crystal one.
Yeah, the Japanese water crystal experiment, famously popularized by Masaru Emoto.
Right.
The underlying claim of this experiment is that human consciousness, like our thoughts, our words, our emotional intentions, can directly physically impact the molecular structure of water.
And the mechanism described in the text is fascinating. He details that when an observer's consciousness is clear, positive, focused, the water molecules actually physically align. They form these incredibly orderly, beautiful, symmetrical, crystalline structures.
Like snowflakes, almost.
Exactly. Conversely, when the observer's consciousness is chaotic, angry, or negative, the water structures physically break down. They become disorderly, fragmented, and just ugly.
Now, we have to note, from a strictly mainstream scientific standpoint, this water crystal experiment lacks rigorous, reproducible methodology.
Right, it's widely categorized as pseudoscience.
Exactly. However, the validity of the experiment in a laboratory setting is much less important here than its function in Schwefeng's philosophical framework.
Yeah, he's using it to build a worldview.
Right. He uses the premise of this experiment to make a monumental leap regarding the nature of reality itself.
Because if human consciousness has the power to literally freeze water into beautiful or ugly molecular shapes, what happens when we apply that same power to an entire human life?
And the author takes this exact leap.
He really does. He uses this concept to claim that the reality of the physical world is actively, literally created by each person's individual consciousness.
Yeah.
So think about what this means for you listening right now. If we follow this text's logic, it means the physical environment around you, the very circumstances of your day, are literally taking their shape based on whether you woke up with a clear mind or a chaotic one.
It's a huge claim.
It means your consciousness is the literal architect of your physical reality.
And the inclusion of that water crystal experiment really blurs the line between the physical material of the world and the emotional state of the mind.
Yeah, it erases the boundary.
Because if your invisible thoughts can organize physical water molecules, and your body, along with, the entire world around you, is fundamentally made of matter, then your internal consciousness operates as the ultimate steering wheel of your external life.
But then the conversation in the text violently shifts. I mean, it goes from the molecular structure of water to this intense macro-level personal accountability.
Oh yeah, it gets very personal very quickly.
The author lays out his boldest philosophical takeaway here. He asserts that a person's living situation, their survival circumstances, basically the everyday reality they inhabit, are entirely caused by their own consciousness.
And he's incredibly specific about what is not responsible for your circumstances.
Right. He explicitly writes that your reality is not imposed on you by God. It's not imposed by Buddha or by saints. It's not the fault of the era you happen to live in, and it's not caused by the actions of other people.
He completely dismisses every external factor that humanity typically points to when explaining suffering, systemic hardship, or, personal failure.
Everything.
Right. He frames all of those things as direct reflections of internal consciousness instead.
Here's where it gets really interesting, but also a bit confrontational. He shares this incredibly stark quote in the source. He says, quote, "This world is not wrong. If there is a mistake, it lies within oneself."
Wow. Yeah, that is a staggeringly heavy burden to place on a person's shoulders.
It really is. It essentially says, if your life is difficult, if you're facing immense hardship or tragedy, you can't blame anything but your own quantum observer effect. How do we even reconcile that? Reconciling a philosophy that places 100% of the blame, And the credit on the individual's mind requires a massive psychological adjustment.
It's true. It is a radically uncompromising worldview.
Uncompromising is a great word for it.
But while it demands an intimidating level of self-scrutiny, this perspective simultaneously eliminates any concept of victimhood.
Right.
By telling Lanyan that the world isn't wrong, the author is forcing a perspective shift away from helplessness. He's encouraging the reader to stop fighting external forces they can't control and instead exercise the immense power of their own mindset.
It operates as a call to profound critical thinking.
Exactly, and relentless discipline regarding one's own internal state.
It's terrifying, but honestly undeniably empowering at the same time. If you are the author of your reality, you have to watch your thoughts with incredible vigilance.
You really do.
So, okay, if consciousness is the ultimate architect of our reality, pulling all the strings, what exactly are those strings made of?
Good transition.
Thanks.
Mm.
This brings us back to Lanyan's original, highly technical question about the physical makeup of the universe. The text zooms back out from the internal mind and dives right into string theory and the scientific quest for a theory of everything.
Right, because we still need a mechanical explanation for what reality actually is at its base level before consciousness interacts with it.
Exactly.
Huifeng addresses the concept of strings by explaining their origin in theoretical physics. String theory was basically born out of the desperate need to unify the very contradictions between waves and particles that we discussed earlier.
The ripple and the pebble.
Right. In this model, the basic unit of nature is no longer a point-like particle. The electrons, photons, neutrinos, and quarks that we all learned about in chemistry class, they are discarded as fundamental building blocks.
Instead, the foundation of everything is an incredibly tiny, vibrating, one-dimensional energy string.
An energy string, yeah.
And the text explains that just as different vibrations on a guitar string produce different musical notes, different vibrations of these microscopic energy strings produce the different fundamental particles we observe in the universe.
That's a great way to visualize it.
But there's a catch, right? The math for those energy strings only works if physicists introduce a concept called supersymmetry.
Yes. And to understand supersymmetry, imagine that every single particle we know of in the universe has a hidden, much heavier shadow partner.
Like an invisible twin.
Exactly, an invisible twin that perfectly balances out the mathematical equations. When physicists added these hypothetical shadow particles to their math, the standard strings suddenly became superstrings. And these superstrings were capable of explaining significantly more about how the universe actually operates.
Huifeng specifically references Stephen Hawking's famous book, A Brief History of Time, and he mentions M-theory.
Which is a huge deal in theoretical physics.
Right. The text notes that for years, scientists were arguing over 5 different competing versions of superstring theory. But then M-theory eventually came along and proved that all 5 of those theories were actually just different aspects of the exact same overarching framework.
Yeah, viewed under different limit conditions.
Right. It's as if 5 different blindfolded scientists were all touching different parts of the same elephant, arguing over what animal it was, until M-theory just took the blindfolds off.
That's spot on. And the text describes this pursuit as a kind of scientific holy grail. Physicists are searching for a grand unified theory to resolve a massive, fundamental conflict in modern science.
The clash of the titans.
Right, the clash between general relativity and quantum mechanics. Because general relativity gives us a perfectly smooth, predictable map of space-time that governs the macro universe like planets, stars, and galaxies.
The big stuff.
The big stuff. But then quantum mechanics gives us this violent, unpredictable, jittery map of probabilities that governs the microuniverse atoms and subatomic particles.
Okay, let me try an analogy here. Imagine trying to build a skyscraper. General relativity is like the blueprint, right? For a perfectly smooth, elegant glass tower.
Right.
It makes sense. You can map it out mathematically, and gravity behaves exactly as you'd expect. But then quantum mechanics is like realizing the concrete and steel you're using to build the tower are constantly violently vibrating.
Yeah, and randomly popping in and out of existence.
Exactly, occasionally teleporting. Science desperately needs string theory to make those 2 entirely different sets of physical laws play nice, so the theoretical building doesn't just collapse.
And while they're at it, they also need this theory to unite the 4 fundamental forces of nature.
Right. They want one formula to rule them all.
Mm-hmm.
General relativity works perfectly for the massive scale. Quantum mechanics works perfectly for the minuscule scale.
But when you try to use the math of both simultaneously, like, say, When you're trying to understand the center of a black hole, which is incredibly massive, but infinitely small, the equations literally break down.
They just stop working.
Right. The math produces infinity as an answer, which tells physicists the theory has fundamentally failed.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, science desperately wants one single, elegant mathematical formula to make sense of the entire universe.
And Xuefeng explains this scientific ambition beautifully to his reader. He shows a very clear grasp of the physics community's goals.
He really does.
But he does this specifically to set up a grand twist. He builds up the majesty of superstring theory, only to explain why he believes this purely physical pursuit is ultimately destined to hit a dead end.
Right. The author introduces a pretty radical departure from accepted mainstream physics here. He claims that superstring theory cannot solve the universe's mystery because science only recognizes four fundamental forces.
Which are gravity, electromagnetism, the strong nuclear force, and the weak nuclear force.
Right. But Xuefeng asserts with absolute certainty that there are actually 8 fundamental forces operating in the universe.
He essentially doubles the forces of nature overnight.
Just like that.
Now, whether he specifies what those extra 4 forces are in other writings, or intentionally leaves them as this elusive spiritual mystery here, it shows he believes mainstream science is essentially playing with half a deck.
Yeah.
Furthermore, he claims that all of science's efforts to find a unified theory are completely futile unless they connect their math to what he calls the antimatter world.
And this declaration allows him to finally directly answer Lang Yan's original burning question.
Right, the question that started this whole thing.
Are the superstrings themselves the antimatter spectre?
And Xuefeng's answer is, technically, no, they are not.
He admits that he only used the concepts of strings and superstrings in his previous writings as a conceptual path for his readers.
A metaphor.
Yeah, he needed a vehicle to transport the reader's mind to the absolute furthest edge of physical reality.
And the text describes this final journey inward incredibly vividly. Xuefeng asks the reader to mentally walk down that microscopic path.
Right, walking past the complex molecules.
Keep going past the atoms.
Past the electrons, past the protons. Keep walking past the photons, the neutrinos, and the quarks.
Keep going until you walk right past those incredibly tiny vibrating strings and superstrings.
And then he asks the ultimate question. When all material basic particles completely disappear from existence, where does the matter go? Is it just empty space?
So he's using the cutting edge of theoretical physics merely as a vehicle. He drives us to the very edge of what science can imagine, and then essentially asks us to step out of the car and walk into the spiritual void.
Exactly. And his conclusion forms the entire crux of his philosophy. He states that no, it is not simply empty space. That not empty space, the absolute void that exists only when physical matter is entirely stripped away. That is the antimatter structure.
It's a fascinating rhetorical maneuver.
It really is.
He uses the strictest, most rigid boundaries of theoretical physics, not as a final answer to the universe, but merely as a diving board into a completely unprovable spiritual void.
Right. He uses the known limits of physical reality to define the exact starting point of spiritual reality. He bridges the gap for Lang Yan by suggesting that the antimatter world, the spiritual essence of life itself, begins precisely at the coordinate where our human ability to measure physical matter ends.
It's like physics serves as the wrapping paper, and the antimatter void is the actual gift inside.
That's a really great way to put it.
Well, we have been on quite the journey today. We started with a single reader's question from 2012 about the microscopic origins of life.
We really covered some ground.
We navigated the bizarre, shifting reality of wave-particle duality, explored the mechanism behind the controversial water crystal experiments, and confronted a worldview demanding radical, uncompromising personal responsibility for our own realities.
Yeah, we unpacked the massive scientific clash between the smooth curves of general relativity and the violent jitters of quantum mechanics.
We looked at how M-theory attempts to string it all together, and finally, stepped past the smallest conceivable units of energy into a mysterious antimatter void.
The text provides just a remarkable synthesis of ideas. It challenges anyone reading it to look at the universe not just as a cold collection of mechanical parts waiting to be measured, but as a dynamic, responsive canvas directly interacting with the frequencies of our own consciousness.
And that leaves us with a final thought to mull over, drawing directly from the implications of Xuefeng's text. Think back to that magical microscope we started with.
Right, zooming all the way in.
If Xuem is right, and life is ultimately an antimatter structure, found only after we peel away every single layer of physical particles and vibrating energy strings. Does that mean your true essence, the very core of you, only exists in the exact place where the physical universe completely disappears? And if so, what does that say about the physical reality you're observing right now?